Hi, it's Melanie, co-founder of Strategic Peace. A few days ago, I interviewed a very good friend of mine, Gira Desai Wieczorek. In fact, Gira was one of my first friends in the Houston startup community. Gira is founder of Aleberry Creative, which is a design and investor relations agency that she and her business partner, Will Bradley, founded 11 years ago. Ever since then, they have been working with founders, accelerators, and investors across the country. Their specialty is working with B2B companies, and they have helped their clients raise over $650 million in funding. Their team is now based in Seattle, so I was particularly excited to catch up with her. Plus, I wanted to share with you some of Gira's extensive knowledge. Stay tuned for lots on pitch decks, on how to approach different types of investors, and just her general take on startup communities. If you find this video helpful, we of course would appreciate it if you would leave a comment below or share this with your audience, or even subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, we hope that you enjoy. Hello, Gira.
Hi, Melanie. It's always great to hang out with you.
Likewise, especially when there's wine involved.
It's true.
Cheers.
What are you drinking?
A Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand.
Ooh, I'm drinking.
How about you?
A Bordeaux.
Nice. Lovely.
I don't know what kind.
All right. So as I mentioned in your intro, a lot of the work that Aleberry does is around helping companies with their pitch decks and raising money. And a lot of that isn't just design, it's about storytelling. So we're going to put you on the hot seat starting, and we want to hear what Aleberry's elevator pitch is.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I guess I can kind of start with our company. Is that right? All right, so we kind of started calling ourselves a design and investor relations agency to separate ourselves from like a typical design shop. There's plenty of designers out there, some that are super good, some that are, kind of freelancers, but we really wanted to differentiate ourselves from the pack by just saying like, hey, like we actually help companies get funded, not just doing, pretty decks. Most of the companies we work with are super technical. So with technical companies, you get a lot of founders who make their decks feel like a white paper, which is what they're used to. So we take a lot of that information, just kind of like to distill it down. We also do websites, help them with kind of like investor intros if possible. We always say, like, with the caveat that if someone's in our network and you guys are a great fit, of course, we're happy to make an introduction. We'll also do kind of due diligence and stuff just to help them identify what investors they should be speaking with. Should they be speaking with angels, VCs in New York and San Francisco, things like that.
Awesome. I think that was under 60 seconds, so well done.
Yay!
So I think one of the hard things for startups or early stage companies to understand or to grapple with is being very consistent with brand is really important. So regardless of whether that's website or pitch deck or emails, you want some consistency there. But as I know that you guys have seen, startups also like to pivot and come up with different value propositions, and that can also impact the brand. So how do you and Will navigate coming up with a brand that's consistent enough for startups to work with, but also gives them flexibility to change as they learn more about their business model or make adjustments?
That's actually one of the things we tell companies quite a bit when they're early, that don't spend tens of thousands of dollars on your brand. Like, you will pivot. And I'm sure, as you know, with some of the venture funds that we've worked with together, they like to also give their opinion once they get to a certain point. And so it's like, well, you're now raising a Series B, and the venture fund is like, you need to change your name, you need to change your brand, you need to change everything. You just spent, $20,000 on a logo. So what we actually do is we combine the kind of what we call a branding sprint. We do that. We combine that when we're doing a deck or a website if a company needs it. And that is just like, we'll spend a handful of hours, come up with, a few concepts. We don't go super detailed, but we make something that looks good. It's professional. The colors appeal to your demographic, and it's legible, most importantly. We've seen some hilarious logos where it's like they actually use a photo, or they'll use some like really intricate mascot, and that's fine, but you have to remember that you're going to embroider this on t-shirts. You're going to need to be able to stamp it. That's what Will always says. He's like, if you can't stamp your logo, you either need to make a different iteration or you need to rethink what you're doing. So we take that and we just do a few hours, combine it into a sprint that we do, like a design sprint that we do with the Decker website, and just move on. And then once they have really established themselves as a company, then we'll kind of work with them on more detailed stuff. But of course, we still do like a style guide. We make sure we create some complementary colors to their main color scheme, pick out some fonts and things like that. But yeah, we tell early stage founders don't spend a ton of time or money on that part of it.
And I think you brought up a really good point there, that your investors or who you're working with down the road will want to have a say in the brands. And I think that there's almost that joke with marketers of like, oh, the new marketing person came on, like the first thing they're going to want to change is the brand and the website, like almost as a rule. So one of the challenges as well, and this is, I think, spans all of marketing, especially the more abstract you get, is that I think there's a lot of value in what we do, because it's stuff that helps communicate who the company is and establish trust and all that kind of great stuff. But especially when you're dealing with someone, like you said, you work with a lot of technical co-founders, and engineers and finance people, their brains think a bit different than the creatives. And so I think it's a challenge to attribute monetary value to this kind of work. So how do you guys get into calculating an ROI, and how does that work for you? How do you demonstrate your value?
Yeah, that's a good question, because again, like I always tell founders, I'm not about to go build your company. Like, we have totally different skills for a reason. So one of the ways we approach it is that we're taking this off of your hands, right? Like, you guys have a business to run. You haven't quite secured that whatever $20 million Series B or whatever you need to actually onboard a bunch of people. So, we're one taking that off your plate. So calculate the amount of hours that you were spending on your deck, and then just hire us for a quick little design sprint. And so a lot of our work actually comes from funds that refer us. So that's helpful. So a fund will tell a portfolio company or a potential portfolio company, I really think you guys need to go, talk to these guys. They are very good at what they do. That is always helpful. But with the ROI, in terms of actual calculations, we don't really have a good way of doing it, except saying, hey, we've helped raise, almost $700 million, and here's some case studies. Instead of you guys trying to, figure out what you're supposed to put in there and spending weeks and weeks, send us all the data, send us your input, and then let us just kind of take it from there. It's like, we always talk about how if I was doing marketing for our own company, it would take it's a full-time job. And you probably deal with that with founders too. You just don't have the time to do it. And one of the things I've learned over the years of having a company is there are things that you should just pay for, because it's just not worth your time. But yeah, I don't know if that really answers your ROI question, but
yeah,
we don't have a good metric, I guess. We have a good metric. We don't have a good financial ROI, except, we know what VCs want to see. Here's our bunch of case studies, and here's the amount of money we've helped secure. So.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And we face that too. And I think, I was on a call with other entrepreneurs earlier this week, and someone brought up that the number one referrals that everyone's looking for as a startup is they want referrals to accountants, to lawyers, to designers, and to marketers, which makes sense because, first of all, a lawyer is important. You don't want to get sued for stuff. And an accountant makes sense because you need clear finances, but it's on the design and marketing front, they're pretty specialized skills. And I think that there's this misconception that, high schoolers are really good at design, or I can hire that college intern for it, except you get what you pay for. And do you want to leave the pitch deck that's going to go make or break your company, or determine at least the velocity that your company can grow at? Do you want to leave that to someone who's not done that before and doesn't know the ins and the outs? And maybe they can do some really good people can do a good basic one, but there are just these underlying nuances that unless you spend your whole day in it, you lose your perspective on, like, you just don't even know that that stuff's important. You don't know what pitfalls to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, and like we make our decks usable. We've learned over time different things that just have to be adjusted. For example, now all of our decks are like 100% edible. Edible. You could totally eat it. They're totally editable, and we make sure everything's like embedded in a master template. The colors and everything are in there. We even leave a little guideline sheet that's like, hey, instead of doing this, just right click and duplicate this slide. There's a lot of those things that I think unless you have a bunch of practice and you see how people are like really using it, and we get feedback from clients over the past, like 10 years, that's the only way you're going to be able to identify these little quirks that, I mean, every PowerPoint, Mac, Windows, you're dealing with so many different devices.
Yeah.
You can't know that unless you're like doing it all the time. And like one of the things we do, for example, is when we do any kind of illustration, we actually embed it as a EMF now. So it becomes a shape in PowerPoint. And those are things that we've had to learn over time. Like, oh, hey, I didn't even realize you could do this. And this now made our clients' lives so much easier. So you're paying for a deck now, but now you have this entire template that you can basically run with and like adjust. And those were things that we didn't do early on because we didn't know. And also PowerPoint has grown in its capabilities as well over time, of course. It's like with you guys with marketing. I mean, there's things that, of course, you can hire entry level, but then you've got micromanagement, and there's things that you just understand, right? Like anyone can go and sign up for HubSpot, but do you really understand how to use it? How's it going to make your life easier? And if it doesn't, you're going to end up spending a ton of hours a week just trying to fix it.
Yeah, I think we recently have been working with a client that every time we would see, like, they were changing their app, they were rebranding, and they would change their app and they would change the website and all these kinds of things. And everywhere, everything that they would do is used a different purple.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So they were all similar purples, but they were off. And again, like, I think unless you are a designer, you work in marketing, and your job is to just, you've stared at these things so much that you don't appreciate that those differences like will jump off the screen to us. And I was really excited because I think this person also at one point was like kind of rolling their eyes about like, why is she like making me get so specific about like the purple hex code, like one purple is another. And when we actually created their first email to go out, it was like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
And it's total victory there. And I think that's the other hard thing for people that don't do this all the time, and like they shouldn't need to worry about, like, that's why they hire us. But it's that you don't, I think it's easy to get lost in the process and lose sight of how this is going to impact and pull everything together once all of these elements are in place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been a struggle, like as any kind of business owner, to balance what you feel like you need to do and then figuring out what hours could best be used by just paying someone. And you and I have talked about this. It's like a struggle for us too, because I have a co-founder, and it's like, we agree on, 90% of the things, but as any good co-founder partnership goes, we tell each other to shut up and disagree like 10% of the time. So and that's just how it is, and that's totally fine. But there are certain things that I just think that founders need to look at what is best served. Is it better to just spend a few $1,000s and like get everything set up, even just for you, like having someone like you come in and set up a foundation is already setting them up for success in the long run, right? Just to get them like prepped.
And I think that is a struggle too I get for a lot of startups or early stage companies where you're like, I have to balance, like, you have some very short-term constraints on what you can and can't do, because it's like, I need to go get customer validation and market validation. So I need stuff set up as quickly as possible. But you also want to set it up so that 3 months down the road, you're not ripping it out and having to redo it. And so getting that balance of getting stuff fast enough, but then also making sure that it's going to scale with you. I think for, you know, I always tell people, I'm like, make sure something's going to scale for a year or two. If it's not going to last that long, like you're investing too much of your time and money into something that's not going to work long enough. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right. So in terms of, so you guys have now been in business for a decade.
Yes, 11 years. It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's just, congratulations. That's awesome.
It is weird.
Yeah. And as with any company, you obviously have a lot of experience under your belt doing what you've done. So what would you say has been the project that's been the biggest surprise to you? Like you thought it was heading in one direction and like everything just kind of ended up going somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had some of those. It's just kind of, I feel like it's just the nature of working with tech companies that are in the process of scaling. We've had a company that we were doing a deck for like a very, I wouldn't say small fund, but you know, it was like not one of the big ones. They ended up securing a meeting while we were in the process of a deck sprint with one of the really well-known funds in Silicon Valley. And like in the middle of the sprint, they were just like, we were almost done. And I was like, okay, guys, I don't have time to change this. Like, we're just going to have to go with it. I was so stressed out because I was like, I would have done a totally different deck. One deck was for an impact investor and the other deck was for like a large fund. Yeah, they ended up securing funds through that. And I basically put together like an impact investor fund deck, which is usually a little different. We've also had companies that like, we don't like their initial design aesthetic, just preference wise. And then we're like, all right, we're just gonna see what happens. We make some changes and then they end up hiring us to just do a full rebrand. Because I think once they saw what their current branding was in place of like a website and a deck and stuff, and they just ended up hiring us to do like an entire project for 6 months. So, you know, things like that just don't happen, like that you don't expect them to happen, and sometimes they go into good. We've also obviously had projects as any other small business where it just like wasn't really working out in the way we wanted to, and it's like a deck that I wouldn't necessarily put in a portfolio or a case study, but it worked for them, and that's totally fine. I just like didn't think it was looking to my, I guess, design aesthetic preference is the best way to put it. And that's okay. People's style guides and preferences are different. I'm sure interior designers deal with the same thing. So, or like wedding planners. I'm sure wedding planners have just like horrendous stories.
So you were talking about the difference between a deck that you would do for an impact investor versus, I assume, more of a traditional VC fund. So how would you approach those two decks?
Yeah, so like the impact investor decks tend to be very mission driven. They tell a story, but really a lot of it, other than like, hey, we're going to make you money on maybe 1 or 2 slides, they really focus on the actual like social good. And a lot of the impact investor funds that we work with, you know, they're partners in a general like syndicate fund of that impact, but they tend to come from like a traditional VC shop. It's just like, this is like, you know, what they're doing. And so it's more of a social good driven. And then the more traditional shops, they want to see how they're going to make money, right? Like they're like, we want to see an exit. We want to see how we're going to make money. So we spend a lot more time on like the competitive landscape and the scalability and the go-to-market strategy. Those slides tend to be more of the focus. Obviously the as well. Like on an impact investor deck, we put really more of like the key metrics of the financials. And then on a more traditional deck, we'll put like the entire chart for the next 5 years of how they're going to make money and when the profits are coming in and stuff like that.
Yeah. So for a typical startup that wants to go out and fundraise, let's say they're raising this either a large seed round or a Series A, how many different versions of pitch decks do you think an average company needs? Because I imagine like you need a very thorough one once investors are doing due diligence or you've got someone really interested, and then a shorter intro type of deck.
Yeah, so we say you should have 3 decks at a minimum and then variations of those decks. So a pitch deck, which is kind of like what you and I have seen a lot or worked on a lot, which is like the demo days, the teasers, they're like, you know, TED Talks. Tell your story, tease the investor to come and talk to you afterwards. Then you should have an investor deck, which is going to be much more lengthy. It's going to talk more about your IP strategy and like any kind of risk mitigation factors are going to be distilled into that deck. and obviously an appendix that's pretty robust. And then we also recommend a very technical and sales deck. And the nice thing about the technical decks is they don't have to look super pretty. Like, use the template we give you, but it's going to be a lot of text. It's going to be a lot of like diagrams of how your product works. For example, if we work with like a healthcare company and their system has to be inserted into a hospital, entire hospital system, then they actually have to go and talk to the IT department at a very large hospital in order for them to even be purchased or like use
right.
So those decks have to be really technical, and we just like, we'll make nice little bullet styles and we just say, use this, feel free to play around with it. But you need to have one of those decks too. And that's actually one of the decks that a lot of founders forget to have when they're fundraising. I just did an Instagram post where I was like, don't forget about your sales deck while you're fundraising.
Yeah, it's important.
We're fundraising. I'm like, you still need to get clients to bridge you over, right?
For sure. And the more clients you have, the more validation that you can put into the other decks.
And your valuation just keep going up. So
yeah. So I want to switch a little bit to more about your background, your experience and story. So you're obviously female.
Yes.
To go purely based on appearance.
I am.
And yes, and woman of color.
Yes.
And you and Will, your business partner, started Aleberry like right out of college. So you were also very young when you were starting. And I mean, I feel like now I'm like approaching more the middle of my career, and I still feel like some people are like, you're so young. And I'm like, I have all this experience too. But yeah, out of school. So you guys were quite young, and you've now been in business for 11 years. So I'm curious if you have what your experience has been over time. If you felt accepted or judged, or, I mean, I know that's a bit of a popular story angle right now, but I'm curious if you can, what you want to share on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the tech world, as you and I know. So for the viewers out here who don't know how Melanie and I met, we were one of the few females together in a very, very male environment.
Very male.
We saw each other, we were like, who is this person? It's another female. And so, it's interesting, I guess. Like, I personally haven't, I should say, outright known, right? So like, there's obviously biases that probably happen when we are competing against people on a proposal, I'm sure. I personally have not seen anything like outright said to me. However, I will say that there's certain things where I've been called like sweetie in the middle of a meeting. One time I was we were working with the fund who was investing in a company, and the company was already raising like a Series F. I mean, they were like super growth stage. The fund hired us to like redo all their stuff because their stuff was very technical. So I'm sitting in this fund meeting, and the founder literally said to me, "Why are you being so serious?" I was like, "Are you serious? Like, what?" Like, in the middle of a meeting, I'm like, this is an investor meeting, and I'm running through your stuff to secure $50 million. Like, why would I not be serious?
I take your business seriously.
Yeah, like I take you as my client seriously. And also, you want to give me $50 million? I love that. I don't have $50 million. So, but there's things like that, like being called sweetie, or just kind of like comments like that. It's obviously like, would they have said that to Will? Probably not. They wouldn't have been like, why are you so serious? I don't know. I mean, there's things like that. I think it's really tough to assess. And I think that's one of the things in society that's been happening recently, is a lot of people are like starting to, I think as more people are telling their stories, I'm starting to also realize like, oh, hey, that actually kind of happened to me, Like before the whole sweetie thing, I just kind of rolled my eyes and was like, whatever, you're stupid. But now as I start to like think about things like that, I'm just like, you know what? They wouldn't have said that to Will. Like,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have called Will sassy. I mean, so I think as more women and just generally people of color are telling their stories, it's starting to become a lot more relatable. I don't know if that necessarily answered your question, but it's kind of
Yeah. I think, you know, obviously, and since we're recording this on video, like everyone can see, I'm like whiter than a ghost. And I mean, so I can't speak from a person of color's perspective, but I can speak from the female perspective in technology and that kind of thing. But I do feel like, at least my experience, so I can't generalize, but so maybe this is specific to Houston, but I think marketing has been seen more as a role for women, and maybe the same on the design front. And so I think that I'm very accepted in that role. Although it is frustrating when like you hear companies are like, oh, that's our marketing girl. Just, I think, and I've said it, like I know I've caught myself saying it because it is just this common expression that's used, and I think it kind of demeans the value. And then I think when I actually start talking strategy or numbers with people, it's like, whoa. Like, yes, have my MBA, like I'm finance isn't my strong suit, but at the same time, like I'm not an idiot, so don't treat me like one. And I don't know if that's the gender so much as the role, you know.
No, I'm with you. I think people think that like, oh, you're a designer, how cute, like, you know. But then I remember specifically being in a mentor workshop where like accelerators will just be like, hey, can you just come in and talk about like, you know, pitch decks, or how can you just like clean up a pitch deck? So, you know, we do quick little run throughs like adding space and cleaning up your bullet alignment and things like that. And I remember when I started, the founder of this accelerator was like, yeah, this is Gira, you know, like she's helped raise this much money and she works with a lot of the funds that we work with. So, you know, listen to what she has to say. And then one of the founders started like grilling me. Like, I think he just thought I was an idiot or something. And so he was like, well, okay, well, what would you do in this case? And have you ever worked with like a cybersecurity accelerator? And I was just like, yeah, I also work with X, Y, and Z Corporation. So pretty sure it's a pitch to them. Like, but it is that kind of assumed mentality, you know, like if Will was doing it, I don't think that entrepreneur would have asked those same questions. I could just kind of tell he was like trying to see if I was smart, which was a little annoying.
Yeah. So if you could go back to what, 22-ish-year-old Gira, and do the like the I have to do it, I have to ask, like, what would you tell Gira? What advice, or would you, I mean, like, it doesn't have to be 22-year-old, but like, what would you have done differently at some point?
So I feel like it's hard because I think there's a lot of things I would have changed, but at the same time, those experiences actually taught Will and I a lot in, you know, by a lot of the mistakes we made. It's like, for example, contracts, like always have a contract. And when you're young, you're just like, oh, it's fine. Okay, cool. Yeah, just like send that over. Even if it's your uncle, like have a contract. It does not matter. You know, but I think that if I didn't go through some of that situations, I just don't know if I would have learned the hard way, unfortunately. But definitely things like that. Also, I was so scared to like network and approach people. And now I'm like, why? That was so stupid. You should have just been like, hey, I'm Gira, this is what I do. Like, I'm really young, but who cares? You know? Kind of confidence. I think a lot of that confidence comes when you're in your 30s. I don't know if you feel the same way, but.
Yeah. I actually think I was better at networking in my 20s than I am now. But we all go through phases. I can tell I'm going to be back out there soon. I think that what helps me on the networking front was when I realized, like, when people are like, oh, I'm not very good at networking, I'm like, nobody's good at networking. Like, nobody is, like, everybody feels really awkward about it. So be the person, like, embrace the awkwardness and go be the person that introduces yourself to someone that's alone and a bit shy. And I will say, like, I think the difference for me is now, like, I have days where I'm feeling like just more introverted, I guess. And so I'm like, I don't need to force it now. Whereas I think in my 20s, I'd have been like, I have to go meet people. I have to go meet people. I have
Yeah.
to go meet people. And now I'm like, you know what? I'm in an introverted phase. And so somebody else is trying to come talk to me. Like I put good karma out there. So what would you say is the biggest risk that you've taken with Aleberry?
For sure. So I would say that, yeah, we pivot our company a few times. And when we pivot, it usually means like leaving money on the table. So that means saying no to potential clients. And that is, of course,
Very scary.
Yes, that's scary.
Terrifying.
Yikes, what's going to happen? But honestly, in the long run, it's been better. Like when you're young, you're okay kind of taking these projects that are really small. You're like, oh, cool, like a few $100. That's so exciting. And then as you get older, you're like, a few $100, really? And I'm sure you've seen this, but the clients who pay the less and nickel and dime you tend to be the clients that have the most administrative work. So learning that the hard way has been rough, but I will say that, yeah, like we've taken some risks with how we work now. Like, for example, we either do design sprints or we do retainers. Like, we don't just, if you want to do a small project, that's fine, but we're going to charge you a sprint rate. Like, you just need a single little flyer, fine, but like we'll just tell people, combine everything you need, put it into one thing, and then we can do a design sprint for you. Or you can hire us on retainer for a minimum of 10 hours a month. But like, if we don't do it that way, you just lose so much administrative hours. And then we have clients who, you know, they don't want to do that, and that's fine. But then you're probably just, you know, we can't work with you. That's definitely a risk. We've moved cities. That was a risk. I remember the first time we left Houston, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, is this a good idea? But it was a really good idea. It's just for our company, it was a great idea. But you know, it's hard because we still have a lot of clients in Houston. It's not to say that we don't, but you know, it's one of those things where you're worried, like, are people going to still work with you? And honestly, the ones who didn't work with us, that's fine. They want someone who can come into the office every day. And, you know, with COVID, it's one of those things where people have actually changed their mentality about that. But we've always been big proponents of being able to work remotely and not constantly having to come in. Not having to come in all the time for meetings, because you just don't need to do that. But, you know, I think that sometimes you just have to make the right decision for the company in order for it to grow. And I knew that if we didn't change our business model, we didn't like at least add a new location of some kind, we would have been stunted.
Yeah. Yeah. So you obviously spent the early years of Aleberry in Houston, and then you guys moved to Washington, D.C. And then earlier this year, the glorious 2020, you moved to Seattle. And so you guys have had and in addition, you guys have done some interesting work in different startup communities, but I think the fact that you've actually lived in several of them, you have a different perspective on it. And so I'm curious what you've seen as the differences, like both good and bad, in these cities.
For sure. And I think, I feel like with Houston, it's easier for me to be like critical just because I was there for so long. However, at the same time, we are where we are because of everything Houston gave us. Like 100%. We tell that all the time. We're just like, we're so grateful. If people in Houston were actually willing to give us a chance, which I have not seen quite as much in some of the other cities. I don't know if maybe that was just because we found the right people. Obviously, like a lot of those people were obviously at our wedding. Like, you know, we consider them family. They're not just friends. But, you know, I would say, like, I feel like geography plays a gigantic role in a lot of it. So when we moved cities, because our address was DC, more people were willing to actually pay higher rates and sign us than when we were in Houston. And it's kind of a dumb perception in my mind. Like, who cares? If you're in Cleveland, Ohio, and you do good work, fine. But one of the things I feel like that Houston lacks in, it's not Houston's fault, but geography-wise, you can pretty much get to like Austin and Dallas. But when we were in the East Coast, it was awesome that we could get to New York and Boston and all these other pretty big hubs for this. We work with financial and med tech companies and things like that. And having those hubs like right there, Houston is fantastic for medical. So can't beat that.
Yeah.
But like Boston, New York and stuff, just so easy to access. It's almost like clients were willing to say, oh, cool. Oh, no worries. You're in DC. We don't care. Like,
Right.
it was like a comfort for them that we could just jump on a train and see them, versus like being in Houston. But then one of the things I've noticed is really like an industry focus. So Houston, awesome for energy, awesome for medical. The medical innovation stuff that we've seen out of Houston is outstanding. Like, we've worked with so many cities and countries, and I still think it's top. But in the East Coast, you've got a lot of financial technology, a lot of like B2B SaaS stuff. And then in San Francisco, you get a lot more of like the B2C companies, versus what you see in other parts. So, you know, I think all of that is good. I do think that one of the biggest critical issues, I guess, is that it's hard to raise if you just stay in one spot, particularly Houston. And, you know, like, we've both worked with founders who've had to go outside of Texas to raise. I think that's more of a mentality issue. It's a cultural issue. It's not an issue with the city, right? It's, you have a lot of these people who do have a ton of money, and but they're putting it in like family offices and PE and like with financial advisors, versus kind of taking that money and being a little bit more riskier.
Yeah. And I think, and I am not familiar enough with the angel investing communities in other places, but I do know that in Houston, and I think to a certain extent this is true in other places, when you're looking at angel rounds, so like really early money, that people really want to invest in startups that are solving problems in industries that they're familiar with. Exactly. So they want to solve problems that they know. And so it's obviously like Houston, with the medical community, the energy community, and the space community, like even that early money is going to prefer startups in those space, because that's what people are familiar with. So
yeah, for sure. And then also, I think the geography part of Houston does make it hard, because I know that when we would try to host an event or anyone, people would complain. They're like, we always have to come out from Katy, or we always have to come out from Woodland. And that's just the geography of the city. It makes it a little bit tricky, but you also can't not do it in the center, because everyone has to be able to get to it. Houston is a sprawling city. Like, it's one of the biggest cities that obviously that we've lived in. But, you know, I think that working in DC and Seattle, I definitely noticed a more, I guess, like, I don't know how to say it. It's like a different attitude to approaching the company. It's not bad or good. It's just the fact that, like, in Seattle, for example, everyone we've spoken to was like, oh yeah, we're formerly from Facebook. We're formerly from Microsoft, you know?
Right.
Have all these
Amazon.
Yeah. And so they already have all these connections. Some of them have, you know, exited some of their stock from whatever. They were acquired by Microsoft. So now they have all this money to kind of bootstrap until they actually raise like a Series A or B. And that's just something that their approach to it is different, because they have money to do it, right? So it's hard to say what's right and what's wrong, but like, there are exits that have specifically come out of DC, exits that have specifically come out of Seattle. Houston has had a couple, but they're going to be more what we like, which is the B2B, very specific industries that we like working with, being super nerdy. But having those, you have to have those exits, like Denver had Dropbox. You have to have those that are well known come out of a community, because once those exits happen, that's how those founders then start either backing other companies or starting new companies and kind of like spreading the community. So in my opinion, one of the things Houston could really do is really support the founders who are building something that's close to an exit. Yeah.
Well, and I think Tony Hsieh's exit with Zappos really changed the startup landscape of Vegas. So
like, you know, whole village or whatever even.
Yeah. The other cool place I've been was the Brandery in Cincinnati. And like, so my mom is from Cincinnati, and so I like grew up going back periodically, and I'm pretty familiar with the city. But going back, I was there, I guess, like 2 or 3 years ago to do a workshop there. And it was amazing to see like it's a very central location. And I think in Cincinnati, because you've got Procter & Gamble and a bunch of other like really big CPG companies, that it's really, and there's so much corporate support for the startups there. And so I think that's the other key thing. And I feel like I've seen that in Houston. I mean, like, the corporate support was different pre-2014, before like the oil industry like imploded. And then what happened in a few years after that, and then it looks different today. So I think that also really matters.
The medical center, like TMC has done a good job with that, with bringing like AT&T and Johnson & Johnson and stuff.
Yeah.
They also have become known really internationally for like their cancer research. So with that, like with MD Anderson and things like that, you get some of these really large medical corporations that maybe not everyone knows, but like we know because we work with them. It's like a gigantic pharmaceutical company will host a pitch event or something.
Right.
But you know, I unfortunately, I do think like the address of your business sometimes, and maybe this will change with COVID. I'm actually pretty hopeful of that, but the address of your business does change how people perceive you.
Yeah, for sure.
I really think COVID will, hopefully, I think like that's just a mentality change. Like COVID just, you know, hopefully will fix.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I am like nearly out of wine.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you my final question, which is, what are some of the top trends specifically around design, graphic design, corporate design, that people should be taking into account right now?
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is I was thinking about this a little bit ago, and I was like, what are the trends right now? Like COVID has kind of changed things. Also, we work with really technical companies. So it's kind of like, well, we're not working with like Allbirds, you know, like, I don't know. But we just try to make you guys look good and make people make sense.
Well, maybe it's not a month-to-month trend. Maybe it's like the trend for like 2019 spanning to 2021, 2022.
Yeah. And it's like the trends we see are so industry specific, so it's kind of funny. However, one of the things I've seen is definitely this like new movement with no code. So people are building without coding, and I think it's awesome. I mean, Aaron, my husband, is like all obsessed with our children learning Mandarin and coding before the age of 4 because he's crazy. And I think that that's important. Like they should learn how to code, especially technical development. But the fact that people with very little technical knowledge can now go out, like we're big proponents of Webflow. We use it now because it's completely responsive. You know, no offense to WordPress, but like Webflow is what's up with small businesses.
It's easy. It's so much easier. Yeah.
Now our clients can click on the screen and make changes, and like we can limit what happens so that if they want to put in 3 paragraphs in a section that should have 1, it will actually alert them and restrict them. So there's these like really cool things. But there's a lot of really cool no code tools now where people can like build an app. You can also build like an MVP. It's not always going to function correctly, but it's like an MVP that tech companies can now use. So it's not really like a design trend, but I do think it's something that's popping up and really helping companies grow and bootstrap until they're ready to like really go all out.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. So let's leave people with, where can they connect with you if they want to connect with you?
For sure. So aleberrycreative.com is our website. I am on Instagram as Gira Desai, Giradesai. And
I'll include links, like when I post this as the blog, I'll include some links too.
Okay, cool. Well then, yeah, you can find us on our website, and you can follow me on Instagram too. And most of their photos of my dog, but that's cool.
And follow them on LinkedIn.
Yes. And LinkedIn.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right.